It's a Friday, so it's time to answer some questions from our mailbag in this edition of Locked on Royals.
You are Locked on Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked on Royals on the Locked on Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts, except for these next two episodes. We're doing a little bit of a change up on how we upload to a Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music, a Google Podcast, and Odyssey. So for today's episode and tomorrow, just going to be on YouTube. So I'm going to put that out there. My apologies. It's just the way that we're kind of changing things up in the Lockdown Podcast Network. But back on Monday, once we get to our episode on Monday, shouldn't be any issues whatsoever. Moving forward, you'll be able to listen again on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all those other podcasting platforms. But these next two episodes, just on YouTube. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked on Royals channel. I work in Kansas City here at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there. Had one last night, actually. Have a show on ESPN Kansas City Monday through Friday. And then also am a producer on ESPN Wichita. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But you know, when you click on this podcast, when you're looking for Royals content, we've got you covered here for 30 straight minutes. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Plenty of great NBA games going on this weekend. So there's no better time to get in on the action. After this podcast, go and create your FanDuel account and start placing some winning bets today. Again, questions can always be put on our YouTube page or to me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, which is important for days like today for a Mailbag Friday. We're going to be doing this throughout the regular season into the off season. Friday episodes are dedicated to you, the listener, you, the follower, for any questions you may have on the Kansas City Royals, who did drop game one of their Cactus League schedule to the Texas Rangers 5-4. Barely any of the starters played, just a handful of them. Daniel Lynch got the start. But again, spring training is just baseball's back. Don't read into anything. I promise you, don't read into any stats. Don't read into any guys succeeding, not playing well. It does not matter. I even put out a tweet that, the 2015 Royals, they finished a half game out of first place. Could have gotten the Cactus League championship. They won the World Series. Last year's squad, half game out of first place. Could have gotten the Cactus League title, and they lost 106 games. Nothing that happens in spring training really can mean anything for the regular season. That's just the reality of it all. But that's enough about a team that's 0-1 in the Cactus League schedule. They'll be on tomorrow, another afternoon game. All of these are basically going to be afternoon games if you've known that by now. For spring training, Alec Marsh, I believe, will get to start. And then on Sunday, the Royals will be on the Bally Sports app. It's not going to be the Royals broadcast. It'll be the Angels broadcast. You can watch that game on BallySports.com or the Bally Sports app. Been getting a lot of questions about Amazon Prime. Unfortunately, right now, I don't know. That's what I can tell you right now. I really don't know when it's going to be put in place. All I can tell you right now is the Royals, I think, are going to be broadcasting on cable 4 of their spring training games. And there's going to be some others on the Bally Sports app, like the one on Sunday, in which Cole Reagans will be the starter on the bump. Okay, let's dive into it with the questions we got from the mailbag. This one comes from Brandon Olderbach. I hope I pronounced that last name correctly. If Vinny Pasquantino has a bounce-back year and all the numbers are looking good by the All-Star break, are the Royals inclined to sign them to an extension before the season's over, or is it more of a wait till the offseason? This really comes down to the player, I think, and what Vinny Pasquantino wants to do. If he starts playing really well, he may sign that extension of, hey, I'm feeling good about myself. The Royals clearly believe in me. Let's get a deal done now. Or the Royals could say, okay, that's been a good first half, but we also haven't seen you play for a full season before. We want to see you play a full season before we commit that money. It's so difficult to tell. Now, I also thought that a Bobby Witt Jr. deal wasn't going to happen when it happened, just because I thought that he was going to bet on himself a little bit. But it wouldn't shock me if a deal got done midseason. I thought last year there was a chance that he was going to get a deal done midseason, and then he got hurt and missed the rest of the year. So health is a big thing for him. I think the player is in there. I think a future all-star is in there. It's a matter, though, of if he can put it together for an entire season. If I was the Royals, I'd try to get him to an extension at some point in the middle of the season because I think it was just 2 freak injuries that happened. I think this is a guy that's not going to be injury-prone for the remaining part of his career. But good question there coming from Brandon. Jason asked, my question is about Daniel Lynch. Does he have an outside shot of beating out Lyles for the 5th spot, or is he more in competition to get a bullpen or long reliever spot? Really good question here. I thought for the most part, he looked okay today. This game wasn't on TV, so I should say he sounded okay today. He had a leadoff walk and then maneuvered around that with 3 quick outs, and he was sitting about 91 to 93 per Andy Rogers, great beat reporter of the Royals for MLB.com. I just don't see a world in which Jordan Lyles right now isn't the 5th starter. I do not think that he is somebody that is going to be moved off that spot even with a bad spring, and that's unfortunate for Daniel Lynch. I think he's just more so fighting for a bullpen spot right now, at least. And maybe that is a good thing. I mean, Daniel Lynch has never put it together as a starter. I don't think that a really good spring gives me confidence that he can take that 5th spot and run with it. I almost think it's all right to start him in Omaha. And then if Lyles really begins to struggle, then you make that transition. But right now, there's nothing he can do unless he was pumping 97, 98, 99 and just annihilating everybody he was facing in spring for me to make that decision to go with him over Lyles. So to me, I'm going to have to punt on that idea that he can win the starting job. Man, this hat's going all over the place right now and trying to get it situated with the camera right now that's a little bit backwards on me. So, but who cares? You know, it's I should be more accommodating for the people that listen on podcasts to the YouTube channel to be a little bit more dressed up than I really am. But I know for a lot of you, you're just here for the content, not so much for the visual aspect, which is why you probably listen on Apple Podcast and Spotify and Amazon Music. Okay, this one comes from, let's see, Callum, I believe it is. Okay, Callum with the funny question, are we winning the World Series? No, I'm just going to say that. No, but I think the goal right now is I've preached all off season long. If you can have competitive baseball for a handful of months, it's going to be entertaining. I think that is a goal for this team. The goal is to win the Central, get into the postseason, and then you have the belief of anything can happen in the playoffs. Just look at the 2014 Royals. But again, I just don't think that this is a scenario in which a World Series is going to be a possibility. I know it's more of a joking matter, but just for anybody that was out there thinking about it, no, I'm just going to say no. I think my preseason prediction will be the Dodgers coming out of the National League, of course. And I think on the American League side of things, I hate to say it, I think the Yankees are going to have a really good run at it. But I also could see a team like, you get the Astros in, they're always going to give themselves a chance. I don't think anybody from the Central, for that matter, is going to get to the World Series. But again, the hope is you're competitive for an entire season and you give yourself a fighting chance in September to get to October baseball. This next question comes from Kenneth. He says, hi, Storm Chasers fan here in Omaha. Who should I be keeping an eye on this season in Omaha? When he gets there, to begin the year, I would say somebody like a Will Klein, because I don't think he's going to be in Omaha that long. When they get there, though, a Javi Vaz would be fun to watch. Mason Barnett would be fun to watch. Walter Pennington looked really good today. I think he's somebody out of the bullpen that would be pretty intriguing. John Rave is somebody that I think is a really entertaining watch. But there's going to be some guys that get squeezed out from Kansas City's roster. They're going to be starting in AAA. So Devin Mann, a super utility guy that came over in the Dodgers deal, he's somebody that would be a bit intriguing. I think it was Joe Gray Jr. He played a little bit. He came over in the Taylor Clark trade. He's somebody I'd have an eye on. So those are just a handful of guys off the top of my head. Another question we got here, an unpopular opinion. If we come out of April with an above 500 record, let's go get some more arms. I don't think they'd be making any moves in May. If they're above 500, they'll probably say, hey, the moves we made are just working out right now. If they are to add anybody, look for that to be closer to the trade deadline. This one comes from JT Royals. With the signing of Austin Nola, we're actually going to talk about him later on in the show. What does that mean for Freddie Fermin? Will they run 3 catchers? Fermin go into the minors? Does he get traded for a closer because of how good Carter Jensen has looked? First off, Carter Jensen will probably start in Quad Cities hopefully with a chance to get to AA and be on the cusp of AAA by the end of the year. But he'll be in Quad City. As for Freddie, for me, he'll be the backup. JJ Picollo said that today. He is going to be the backup. He's confident he'll break camp with the team. So it's Salvi and Freddie, and then Austin Nola has a chance to make the roster, but he's also got an option. He can be down in AAA as just catching depth, which is never a bad thing. Also keep in mind here, Austin Nola can play the infield as well. He can play second. He can play first. That gives him a little bit more utility flexibility. So if he doesn't make the roster, it is a third catcher, but he's also somebody that can play multiple positions, which the Royals, of course, like. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we got more questions to answer from our mailbag on this edition of Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in Backblaze. Go and check them out on backblaze.com/LockedOnMLB because they've got unlimited cloud backup for Macs, PCs, and businesses for just $99 a year. They easily protect the business data through a centrally managed admin, and over 55 billion files are stored for customers. So here's what you need to do. Visit backblaze.com/LockedOnMLB so they know where you came from and continue to support this show of Locked On Royals. It's also been recommended by the New York Times, Macworld, PC World, LifeWire, Wired, Tom's Guide, 9 to Mac, and many, many more. Receive a fully featured and no risk-free trial at backblaze.com/LockedOnMLB. Go there, play with it, and start protecting yourself from potential bad times. Start today over at Backblaze. We got more questions from our mailbag. And again, you can always reach me through Twitter. It doesn't have to be public. You can direct message me, or you can also leave some questions on our YouTube page. I try my best to get to those in a timely manner. Sometimes I miss them, but the best spot to reach me, of course, is on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Next question comes from Alex. Would the Royals be doomed to the bad April? I'm glad this was brought up. Absolutely not. And this is why. Their schedule is brutal in April. Brutal. And I understand that a lot of people are going to overreact in just the initial part of it if the Royals are bad in April. They can't be awful. I'll tell you, they can't be 5-20 because that will bury them. Being 15 games under 500 that early in the season, that's tough to overcome. I do believe that if they can get out of their 5 games under 500, I'm still not sweating it because they've got a lot of tough teams in April. They're going to get the Twins and Orioles to open up the season. They get the White Sox twice, so that will help you out a little bit. You're going to have the reigning World Series champions and the Rangers in there. You're going to get Toronto in there. You're going to get Detroit in there, Milwaukee in there. There's a lot of really good teams in April. Of course, the goal should be to get to a point where you're not drowning by April, but do not get it twisted. A bad April, a subpar April, does not bury this team. It is a very tough schedule, and I think it's a great test early on, a very good challenge, because if they come out of there 500, I feel damn good about this team moving forward, even though it's that early in the season, because April has always been the Achilles heel of this baseball franchise. So good question there from Alex. This one comes from True to Blue KC. This was actually asked before the spring training game today, so it's a little bit outdated. That's more so my fault than anything. What are we looking for during Lynch's inning or two tomorrow? Let's just recap what Daniel Lynch's outing was. He had a leadoff walk and then bounced back with 3 straight outs, just sat guys down, 1, 2, 3, no strikeouts. It's not a bad thing. Command, I think, is the most important thing for him, and velo a little bit. He was sitting about 91, 93. You can build on that. For me, Daniel Lynch has to find a way to get back to that swing and miss stuff. The command will follow from that. If you're striking out a lot of guys, you have to have some form of command. Last year, I thought it was kind of a waste to have a little bit better command, but not power stuff at all. He's got the frame and the arm action of somebody that can really be effective if he's at around 95 to 97. But right now, just 91, 93. It's early in spring. You're more so building the arm up. That is an important thing. I'd imagine if you can get him to 94 to 95 by the start of opening day, it'd be a good look down in Omaha. So that's what I was looking for. And today, I can't complain. He bounced back from a leadoff walk. Jake Brent certainly couldn't do that. Boy, Jake Brent has a long ways to go if he is going to find a way to crack this roster, because that was a putrid, putrid, awful outing for Jake Brents today. First time he had pitched in game action in a long, long time, but I know he was probably nervous. The anxiety might have gotten to him, the anxiousness of being on the mound. He walked 4 guys and only got 1 out. It was a strikeout to Marcus Semien, only got 1 out, wasn't very good. This question comes from Ben. How good of a start would we need to have for Kaufman to be close to full on most days? Well, you know that in April and May, with it still being the school year, you're not going to see many games where Kaufman is packed. That's going to probably happen closer to June and July if the team is contending. And I'd imagine if they're around 500, if they're hovering around 500 the whole year, you're going to have, there's some nights, some Friday nights, some Saturday nights, and some Sundays where the crowd's pretty full, getting pretty packed. In April, though, weather's too cold in school. Start times can be a little bit tough for people that have children. There will be some games, though, hopefully. If there's a really nice night in April and it's a Friday, you could have a good crowd. Hopefully the Royals can get out to a good start. And, I'm talking like 7-5, 10-8, where they're playing good baseball at that point. And that should get some people out there to the ballpark and for meaningful baseball that early on in the season. Going to be a lot of fun matchups, I can tell you that. Lots of fun matchups in April. But if they're around 500 and they're within shouting distance of the top spot in the Central, I'd imagine we'll see some pretty good crowds at Kauffman Stadium during the summertime. This one comes from JR. I'm out of market, so I would like to know how to watch the Royals this season. I've been watching on DirecTV forever. So this comes back to the Amazon Prime thing. As for the Amazon Prime deal, I do not know right now. I do not know what the fee will be. I do not know when they're going to announce that. That's kind of up to them at that point. For right now, the Bally Sports app is what you'll have to go through if you're watching through a streaming service. You can find that on just the app list. Just search it, Bally Sports, and you'll have to pay a little bit of a subscription for the entire season. That's one way to watch them. If you have cable, there's a couple of different cable services. I know Spectrum was one that I'm very confident has the Bally Sports channel. That's another way to watch him. If you watched him last year and you weren't in the blackout areas, nothing changes for that. The hope is when Amazon Prime announces their plan, which hopefully will be before the regular season, that'll be another outlet for fans to watch. So you'll go to Amazon Prime. If you're not in a blackout region, you'll pay for the subscription there, and then you'll be able to watch all Royals games all season long. So that's what I got for you there, JR. Travis asks, what do the Royals have in future center field? Could this be a point of emphasis in the draft? It's tough to draft for position in baseball. I don't think that's the way to go about it. There's so many guys that are going to change positions throughout the minor league level. Mike Moustakas was a shortstop. I remember they moved him over to third base. You're going to have outfielders that move into the infield, infielders that move to the outfield, catchers that move around. So it's not really a point of emphasis to me. In terms of depth there, Carson Roccaforte, they took there last year. I think he can be a really good center fielder. There were some comps to Andrew Benintendi. I think, we can see what he looks like early on in his minor league career. Javier Vaz, the 15th round pick out of Vanderbilt. He's somebody that can play second and center field. Excited to see what he looks like early on this season. John Rave is a little bit of a prospect. I don't think he's an everyday player. You can certainly throw Drew Waters in there as a future center fielder. He's just got to show it a little bit more. Spencer Nivens, Jared Dickey, 2 guys that were taken in the draft last year. Opportunities to shine in center field. So there are some guys out there, but no, I'm not going into the draft drafting for a center fielder. I'm taking the best player available when it gets to the Royals at that number 6 spot. This question comes from RB Carr. Based on what you saw in Surprise, has your projected opening day 26-man roster changed? Yes, it has just a little bit. Now, I didn't get to see any scrimmages, but to me, I think what I saw today, I'll have to change a little bit. With the addition of John Schreiber, that changed my 26-man roster. And then what I saw from Jake Brents today, I don't think I can put him on my opening day roster. He was on my opening day roster, which is why I wanted to say I'm going to do an official prediction like 2 days before they announce it. Like as spring training is concluding, here's what I'm going with. And the one that I might change my mind on, not because of his home run today, but because of what Matt Quatrero said in a media scrum in Surprise. When I asked him about how they're going to rotate in the outfield with MJ Melendez, where he's going to play. He said Drew Waters' his name and not Dairon Blanco. So I don't know if the plan is for Dairon Blanco to start in AAA or for Drew Waters. But since he said Drew Waters, it's clear that the plan going into spring was that they want to rotate him out there at the major league level, not so much at the AAA level. So yeah, my opinion has changed a little bit after what I'd seen and heard from Surprise. And Matt asks on Twitter here, why do you think the Royals took the quantity option over the quality option? They were clearly ready to spend this level of money. So if they were going for fewer higher quality free agents, that would have elevated this year while giving ABs and NEC young guys as well. So why did I guess I'll go back to the main point here. Why did they go to the quantity option over the quality option? I mean, I wouldn't say they necessarily took that approach. I think that they went for quality in the starting pitching market and what was truly affordable to get a lot of guys. I mean, Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo were top 10 starting pitching free agents, and they wanted to still have money to spend around for the bullpen and a couple position guys. So I guess that does go hand in hand for the quantity option over the quality. What I would say to your point, Matt, is if you were asking why didn't they go after a Blake Snell or why did they not go after a Matt Chapman or a Cody Bellinger, my question to you would be if they just spent a lot of money, which those guys are going to get big deals, if they just spent a lot of money on Blake Snell and didn't have a lot of money to spend elsewhere, what did the Royals do? What did the Royals win? Probably not a lot of games because Blake Snell was a Cy Young candidate and the Padres didn't make the postseason with a much better roster than the Royals have right now. Now, the Padres were in a very tough division and they had a tough schedule, but still, I look at it and say, I think the quantity option was trying to raise the floor of this team. They wanted to get a lot more depth with this team, and they certainly have done that. I didn't think it made too much sense to go out there and drop a load of cash on one guy. You might want to go get a bunch of number 2 guys and some depth pieces where that you can get through an entire major league season and not be scrambling for scraps at the very end of it. Well, those are all of our questions from Mailbag Friday. Again, you can always shoot me over questions on the YouTube channel or on my Twitter account. Very, very easy to reach me. Thank you to all the followers and listeners that sent them in for today's episode. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now available on Free Fire TV Channels app. When we return, I'm going to give just a quick synopsis as to why the Royals signed Austin Nola. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And usually you can find us on all the podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. The reason I say usually you can is that this episode and tomorrow's episode are just going to be on YouTube. We're going through a little bit of a change in how we upload our podcast to those platforms. So today and tomorrow, just YouTube. Back on Monday, it'll be very easy for all of you that listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to get to those episodes. But for just these two, only going to be available on YouTube. I apologize for that, but maybe you can still plug this into your car or plug it into, your wherever you listen. I don't know, your Alexa or something, and try to hook up through Bluetooth. And it's not really that much of a change. I know it's a little bit more difficult, but that's what we're working with here. Wouldn't have been a problem if I would have recorded this episode in the morning or if I would have gotten one in on Wednesday and got the audio correctly. But again, that's more on me than anything. All right, before we move on to that last segment, let's give a shout out to our final sponsor today and our title sponsor in FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much, much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And March Madness, of course, right around the corner, about a month away. So you want to start familiarizing yourself with how you're going to be placing those bets on FanDuel. My wheelhouse is with those prop bets, which I already mentioned. In a bit of that live read. So that's where I think a lot of the good money is involved. And if you're not as familiar, listen to the experts out there, which things to bet on, how to win money. Don't just throw money away. You want to make sure that when you're investing, you get a good amount of money. But hey, that's a great deal there that we're providing on the Locked On Podcast Network, because you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That sounds like a pretty damn good deal to me. Last thing I want to say is just a little bit onto why the Royals did sign Austin Nola. And it was actually good for my sake that JJ Picollo spoke to the media as to why they made this move. Catching depth is important. If you forgot from last year, the Royals got pretty banged up at the catching position. Salvador Perez was banged up. Freddie Fermin ended up breaking his finger, had a fracture in his finger. So they were using Logan Porter and Tyler Cropley by the end of the year. Having guys like Sandy Leon and Austin Nola are not really going to boost your offensive numbers. They are catchers first. They are defensive catchers. That's what they've always been known for. The reason I think the Royals went after Austin Nola, JJ Picollo said they were trying to get him early on in the offseason. He played for San Diego last year, so he caught Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo. There's some familiarity there. And that kind of is more of an innovative way that the Royals are looking at building this team. We see a lot of teams out there sign catchers that are like one-pitcher guys. I remember Yu Darvish had his guy in Victor Caratini. John Lester had his catcher. I can't remember if it was David Ross or not. But they had like their guy. They only throw to them. And I think that's kind of a cool, innovative way to go about it. Do I think Austin Nola makes this team? No. Because I don't think they'll put Austin Nola on the roster and squeeze out Dairon Blanco or Drew Waters. That doesn't feel very likely to me. But it's good to have catching depth, and it's good that he's got an option, a minor league option, so he can start in AAA. And then if there was somebody that got banged up and you needed some relief, Salvi's been banged up the last handful of years. You need to be able to trust somebody to get him out there, and he's caught before, and he's not a rookie, and he's been successful at a high level before. Austin Nola has been successful at a high level. He's the brother of Aaron Nola, by the way, the Philadelphia Phillies pitcher. So to me, nothing wrong with adding in catching depth. I know there's people out there that are upset about the signing or compare it to the Adam Frazier deal and the Garrett Hampson deal. Look, it's just catching depth. You can never have enough catching depth. It's important to have because it's a position that gets banged up all the time. They are constantly taking a beating back there, and to have some insurance never hurts. And he also plays second base and first base, so he can move around a little bit if you needed some relief there. The Royals have very much made it clear that having as much depth as they can is important for this team's success. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Always be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye for a Friday episode, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We'll have another episode tomorrow, again, just available on YouTube. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.